Thank you to my fellow panelists for joining us today. Thank you to the audience. Today we'll just be having a dialogue, conversation, understanding if there are any solutions, particularly to the challenges in financing and funding in the film and television industry. I do have Floki Gordon, who is in the middle right over there, who's a South African producer with over 35 years experience. She is the founder of Advantage Entertainment with a portfolio having produced over 60 feature films. I do also have a film producer, Delon Barker, who is the co-founder of Mannequin Films. He also has over 10 years of experience, particularly within the film industry. Alongside there, who's also a film producer, I've got Pepsi Bukana, who's also a film producer, specifically also dabbing into the different formats that we do have in the film industry across South Africa, Kenya, as well as Nigeria. Also with a great, is it 2 decades, Pepsi, producing in the film industry. And alongside, I've also got the 2 individuals on my right who are not the film producers, but I've got Kagisho, who's coming in as the sector's lead for the film and television financing at the IDC. You've also got a great extent of academic records, specifically in developing finance in the South African landscape. And I've also got Milton Redley, who's more in the sales and acquisition, the licensing, distribution space, with also 2 decades in the industry. Is it two? Yeah. It is 2. So I'll jump into it. I know we are slightly just delayed by time, but hopefully we can cover and unpack as much as we'd like to, specifically in the session. Kagisho, I'll start the first question through you. Let's touch on the role of government agencies. We're aware that you are at the IDC, which is a governmental agency specifically also assisting in the film and television sector. What are some of the governmental models that are in place specifically for film producers, for film houses? What do those also look like?
Okay. Thank you, Ayanda. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. I think the biggest challenge that we have as a sector is that there is market failure as far as financing is concerned. So commercial banks are not really keen on the sector because this sector or financial models were not built with the sector in mind. So the financial models were built for what they call the real economy, where people are manufacturing, buying machines, etc. So the market failure makes it necessary for government to step in, to say that as a government, we have development finance agencies that have the balance sheets and the resources to stimulate activity in the sector, which poses a few challenges. Because number one, as a funding institution, you must be financially sustainable yourself. Number two, you are governed by normal risk management processes like accounting principles and finance principles, which are all built around the tangible economy. So the biggest challenge we have now is around how do we then use existing models to be able to accommodate the sector in terms of the nature of the assets it creates. But the government now has kind of figured out that different stages of production have different risk profiles. For example, you can't really use loans to finance development, especially speculative development. So government has established the NFVF and the film commissions to look after that market, to say this market requires soft funding that can play a catalytical role in creating stories and bring them to life. And we have the IDC and the DTI who hand in hand are working towards more the production side of things. But the challenge still remains that the sector has to fit in within a finance model that was not built for it. And even internally, the processes are not built for the system. So as much as the filmmakers are frustrated about lack of access to funding, those who are already walking the journey are frustrated by how intense the journey is. And those of us who are within the system are also frustrated because we must keep explaining to the system how this industry must be done. But that doesn't mean hope is lost because we are making traction, we are gaining traction. I think from an IDC point of view, we've been doing this for 20 months now. And I think we've seen significant strides in terms of the risk appetite, as we call it. The attitude towards the sector has changed completely, but it's a constant communication issue around how do you communicate to those who make decisions to make sure that they can understand the nature of the assets, the recoupment process, and the developmental impact. Because as it is now, film is actually the biggest job creator in the sector. And with a bit more funding, a bit more structured funding that responds to the sector, I think we can make a huge dent to the economic situation.
Thank you for that, Kagisho. I think you mentioned to say that the system is currently, or whatever the proposed systems that are in place, are challenging. But are there any strategies that the IDC, for example, is looking at to empower and encourage economic development? I know that you're saying that there are systems already in place and you guys are realizing, for example, some of the challenges. For example, you've mentioned to say that pre-production is not part of it, but what are the strategies that the IDC may be taking? It doesn't have to be current strategies, but what does that look like in the next 4 years, 5 years, if the system currently is an issue?
So our strategy has two focus areas in terms of creating bankable projects. Number one, we need to build production houses where you know that a production house has enough funding to create multiple projects on a continuous basis. And because that helps them build their own brand in the market, they can activate the market on their own. Because we recognize the fact that when you solve a problem, you must solve it in its entirety. So if market failure happens on the finance side, but market failure also happens on the access to market side. So we can't just do the part where we're just putting in investment, but we don't invest in market activation. So we're also looking at building distributors who can distribute content on the continent and globally, so that at least when we invest the money, we are able to recoup the money out of the productions. I think most producers who've dealt with us will know that now we tend to insist on pre-sales because it's a safer way to say the content is already being pre-sold, we're not being speculative in what we are investing in, but also there's a bigger market of cinema and creating appetite for local content and access to internal markets. So we are looking at it holistically to say, let's build a strong distribution platform, let's build strong distributors, so that when we invest, we know that the content we're investing in can be monetized. So that's our outlook in the next few years.
Thank you for that, Kahisho. I will then move on to Delon. I know, Delon, you've had an opportunity to develop skills, specifically being a part of the Sidibe financing program, specifically for the international market. What are some of the challenges as an independent producer that you would say some producers that could probably resonate with you do face in the South African sector when securing financing?
Yeah, I think that the Sidibe program is something that the NFEF runs, which I did about 10 years ago, which I found very helpful because it helped give me an understanding on film finance. And there are a lot of producers that just don't understand how to finance a project. And so that's where, Kishore rightly said, there's that frustration that comes out. And, because making movies is very difficult. Okay, we all should have done something else, like sold used cars. But the thing is so the Sidibe program was great, and a lot of the challenges that we face today, some of them are self-inflicted, unfortunately, in terms of certain government institutions. But I think the market's changed radically. Independent film and cinema used to live off the box office and DVD. And those ancillaries were very important to making it a profitable business. That's all changed now with the streamers. and you've seen traditional distributors come under heavy pressure. But in saying that, there's lots of opportunity. There's always opportunity around. You just got to be able to find it. And South Africa does present a lot of great options in terms of making films, especially the production means. The ability to make productions out of South Africa is still a very cost-effective program. The question is, how do you finance it, and where do you find that financing, and where are you specifically aiming towards? I know for us as a company, a lot of our stuff is aimed internationally, because that's the way we justify those costs. Outside of that, producing stuff locally is very challenging.
Thank you for that, Delon. I think you've also just mentioned to say that there is a change specifically in how we consume traditional sort of filmmaking. Streamers are now in. And Floki, I'll come to you. I know you've produced a whole lot of features specifically in the African continent, as well as also dabbing into the international market. What do you think as a producer, what mechanisms can be in place to assist producers or filmmakers to overcome some of the challenges that Delon has just mentioned as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see how the industry has changed, and specifically the funding structure and requirements has changed over the years. I mean, we come from pre-DVD days to movie of the weeks to where we are now. And it's interesting how the finance milieu around that changes as well, depending on what is required and what is demanded of that period. I think often what I find with South African producers and filmmakers is that they rely very much on the government structures and only on the government structures. I also find that a lot of the attitude is, let's make it, somebody will actually pick it up, and not really understanding that, firstly, before you sort of spend a lot of time and effort in a project, developing a project, to start actually at the end is, who am I sending it to? Who's going to be my partner? Who's going to distribute it for me? How am I going to fund it? Is it a fundable project? So we all have our dream projects. We obviously all want to make the optimum projects. And look, it is frustrating because one day the streamers and the broadcasts tell us we want to have these amazing African stories, and tomorrow they tell us, no, we don't want any of that. We only want sort of adapted IP. So it's hard. So the first thing I'll say, just hang on to your original materials, because the time is going to come when they've done enough IP shows, they're going to come back to the original material. But just to read up as much as you can, whatever course you can do a course, learn, talk to producers. Don't be shy to ask. When you're at a network function like this, ask, talk to people, learn from others. We're here, we are happy to share. Everybody here is happy to share what their journey has been, what they have found, what is the opportunities, what's not the opportunities. But I think at the end of the day, it is 100% to look wider, look broader, understand what is the landscape, and understand every single opportunity out there. Exactly what does the IDC offer? How does it work? What are their requirements? What does the NFVF offer? What is the sort of whatever program there are out there, because there are quite a few programs. And ask and learn.
Thank you for that, Floki. Pepsi, I think we'll come through to you. Floki's just mentioned to say that there's a lot of dependency specifically on government agencies. Delon has also mentioned to say that there are entities such as the NFVF who do offer programs to support upskill. But what models could independent filmmakers as well as government agencies propose or collaborate or engage in bringing in the private sector, if Floki is saying that there is a lot of dependency specifically on the government?
That's a great question, Ayanda. I think the first thing is there are a few things. One, we need to have a family meeting where we're honest about whether these government institutions are working or not working, and whether they are correctly geared towards the needs of the sector. So that needs to happen, because I think even as things change, our institutions don't necessarily evolve. I think Floki spoke about the evolution of, some of us are slightly older, so pre-DVD, this, that, and the other. And the world's changed, and a lot of our institutions haven't changed at all. They've stayed exactly the same. So there's that conversation. I think that there's potentially insufficient investment that we make as an industry, both as companies but also as government, in terms of figuring out the distribution piece and spending, because that's half the battle won. Everybody wants pre-sales, but if you don't have an international network, if you haven't taken the time to go out there in the world and figure out who the players are, what they're looking for, at what price points they're looking for it at, then you can't package anything. You can't go out and sell anything, but that's expensive. So I think the role of, for instance, an IDC, it's not just the funding of projects, but we need to figure out how the likes of the IDC can put some money towards the education piece in terms of figuring out who the players are, how the distribution works. Dylan spoke to it a little bit earlier, but he'll tell you, jumping on a plane to go to LA, it's expensive. These marketing trips are expensive, they're time consuming, it's tricky, you're always learning, and I think we would be better off as a sector if we spend some resources on the research piece and the understanding of the market piece.
Thank you for that, Pepsi. I do think you've kind of touched on actually a question that I was going to pose over to Milton, since he's in the distribution space, sales, acquisition, and Pepsi is touching on quite crucial elements to say that it's quite an expense. And we are talking about the boundaries specifically within the film financing, but he's also then touching on the distribution element. How has the traditional methods of distribution changed specifically within the chain? And as a distribution agent within the sales, what are those gaps? What do they look like now? Because I know Floki earlier then mentioned to say that now there's the streaming platforms. What does that then look like?
I think when you've been this long in the industry, it's a bit nostalgic to be talking about DVD and VHS in the good old days. It was the better part of my career, but it really was the rights or the platform that could be monetized to actually show recoupment to projects, and I think that's the biggest gap. Sometimes there's a misnomer about distribution where often producers think that distribution means kind of getting a project sold or broadcasts to a streamer or onto a channel, but it's a lot more than that, because every piece of content represents multiple rights, and generally you try to monetize across those rights to recoup against that particular project. And if you're talking about a traditional feature film, theatrical would have been the first platform that you go to, and then move on to transactional VOD and the home entertainment elements, which really allowed, I think, producers to recoup a significant portion of that production budget before getting into the long tail of pay television and SVOD. And that's what we would consider a traditional model pre-COVID. And I think COVID kind of accelerated a lot of the slight decline that a lot of those platforms had. I mean, DVD in particular, South Africa was one of the last markets, one of the last 3 markets in the world where we had quite a robust DVD market. It was still 400 million rand per year, and within 6 months that was totally gone out of the ecosystem. So there's no easy way to replace that. Because I think the issue is twofold, is that you have cost creep in terms of production costs, labor, technology, but the licensing fees haven't exactly gone up either. So you still have those who are in the ecosystem still contracting and licensing at the same levels, where that model hasn't changed. It's been in existence for 10 to 15 years, but the benchmarks are no longer there. So all that pressure has then been transferred back into the production budget, and I think the fundamentals of the way projects are being put together in terms of financing has dramatically changed. And it's that shopping to the international market that's become extremely crucial to greenlight projects. And I think that's where the involvement of a distributor or a sales agent and the importance of having them on board in a project almost pre-development is so important, because part of what they do is evaluate projects in terms of its packaging elements on will this work in an international market, and having access to that international network to be able to pick up the phone or send through an email with a deck and have it shopped by someone that's your equivalent in more developed markets. Because what we're trying to attract for South Africa is really international spend, so that we can produce the quality that we are used to putting out in the markets. I mean, in the known associates ecosystem, you know, the servicing companies done some of the biggest Hollywood blockbusters out there. So it's not a question of quality of crew and certainly of cost that we can attach to projects. It's just a matter of getting the funding to deliver at that particular level. But what's traditionally happened, I think Flockie said, is that a lot of the reliance comes out of South Africa because we think local. So we think all the money's got to come out of the continent. But we are not, we're a content-rich continent, but we're not necessarily a funding-rich continent. So we've got to look to markets that are developed, like the Americas or in Europe. And I think a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen some really good examples of that. I think MultiChoice in particular has kind of taken the lead with projects like Reka, you know, Trackers, or even if you look at something like Spinners, where you have other broadcast co-productions and then a distributor kind of working within that model to access other international markets outside of those to get projects greenlit.
This is just a follow-up question just to that, though, Milton. And I mean, it would be great for you to answer it. But I mean, you speak about to say that we need to look at other models, for example. Do you believe that as Africa, we could also develop our own particular model that could work for us? Because Pepsi mentioned earlier to say that the international networks, it's so expensive to access that. But what does that look like if you're saying distribution is in the first phase?
From a local perspective, from an Africa perspective?
Yes.
I think there's different challenges with Africa. It's not like when you look at North America as a continent and everybody kind of speaks English as a first language and then Spanish as a second. So your ability to access the market with scale and with volume is pretty easy. When you look at the continent of Africa, you're talking 52 countries. English is not the most widely spoken language across the continent. I mean, we've got 11 official languages and they don't travel beyond our borders. You've got Arabic up in North Africa. So I think it's a lot more difficult to kind of get projects greenlit and penetrate the market. Because I think when other players in the international market look at Africa, they look at Africa as one, as a homogeneous region. But that's not the case. We broke it up culturally. And so I think what's interesting about MIP Africa this year, as the others, is that there's a lot of pan-regional broadcasters that are here at the moment. And so some of the discussions that we are having is trying to find projects that can work well in their region and in our region. How do we carve that up from a language perspective? How do we carve it up from a casting perspective? And how do we ensure that we don't miss the critical element in distribution, which is marketing? Because we have to create the anticipation for these shows. A lot of the shows kind of fall flat because people don't know about them. We're not able to drive watch hours across this content, and so they don't get recommissioned for a second season. So I think there's different elements in it, and the solution for Africa is going to be quite unique compared to other markets.
Thank you for that, Milton. I will throw in the last question, and I'm happy for Pepsi, Delon, as well as Flockie, just to come in on that, and then I'll give Kagisho an opportunity to also then just respond back to the question from a government agency's perspective. But do you believe that we could find mechanisms, or there could be some sort of models that film producers can create to attract the private sector?
Who wants to take that? Who's
go
taking
first.
that?
I mean, I can start. I think, look, there is no such a thing as an African unique model, right? The film industry in the world works the same. it's part of a business. It's like you don't build a house differently in South Africa than you build a house in America or in Europe. So what are the building blocks? What are the foundation? Pretty much the foundation is, if you want to do a project, you need an MG. So you need somebody that's going to give you a minimum guarantee. You need a rebate, because that's how it works. That's the structure. You need some equity. And whichever territory you are from, you need a broadcaster in that territory. So how it works international, and the international structure, if you're from South Africa, you're not going to release your MG. Let's say for an argument, I've got ITV, argument's sake, I've got IDC, the rebate, and now I'm looking for a South African broadcaster, right? So I'm not going to get my ITV money if I don't have a South African broadcaster. What is the challenge with that? We only have the South African broadcaster, we've got ETV, we've got Mnet, and who am I missing out? SABC, right? That's it. That's all. Each one have their own criteria or their own demand. Within that also, each one has a definitive amount that they're going to. We know what the SABC is going to give us. We know what we're going to get from the from MultiChoice. We know what ETV. So we know what each of those partners. What does that mean? That means either you're always going to stay around some kind of budget level, or if you want to go a higher budget level, you can only either go to the IDC to get more money and hope they're going to come in as a part of an equity investor as well, over and above of your cash flow of your rebate, or you're going to have to try and get a bigger investor on your MG side, on your international partner. What's happening more and more is that your big international distributor takes worldwide. What does that mean? It means exactly what Pepsi was saying, is that the institutions of South Africa, and Kagiso know this, we have lots of conversations about it, is that after the DVD days, the broadcasters didn't use, or your MG partner didn't use to take such a big territory. They would say, for example, okay, we take North America, we take the UK, and we take Australia, argument's sake. Therefore, you've got the NENT countries left, and you've got a few other countries left, which would mean that if the IDC comes into your finance plan, they know they've got 3 or 4 or 5 territories they can still sell to cover their investment if something goes wrong. But the new model, and that's why I keep on saying, what I find what is happening in the world is that the financing, especially now after in the situation where we're sitting now after the big strikes, with the American industry pretty much collapsing, which means it's collapsed, it has a domino effect, is that we're seeing finance models that's coming back that we used in the 90s. Like a big thing again is pickup deals. Well, there's no financial institution in the world anymore that's set up for pickup deals. They don't do pickup deals because we did pickup deals 15 years ago. So now the industry and the financial institutions has to catch up. That's one point. The other point is IDC will say, well, we really love the project. We can undersee it's got a commercial value. We like the actors. We like what it is. But because of the model, which is an older model, we can't unfortunately get involved because we need 3 or 4 territories which is carved out so we can have that as our backup, as our comfort. So now we're sitting in a situation, now we you know what I'm saying? Now we're sort of saying, okay, now we're going back to our partners who's putting in 60% of the financing, argument's sake, and saying, look, we have to carve out these territories. Then they come back and they say, well, if we carve out these territories, we're only giving you 45%. Do you understand? It's like this moving target all the time. So, I just think that what we need as a solution is to say, what is the model out there? We cannot rewrite, we can't rewrite the financing laws of the film industry. It is what it is. We have to adapt and we have to create through the structures that we have to serve and to fit in those models. Otherwise, we're always going to stay reliant on what the government offers. We're not going to be able to become true players where we can basically say, I want to be part of the back end of this co-production. It's my concept, it's my idea. Yes, let's put it together, but I hang on to that. I mean, thanks for the NFF and thank you to the IDC. They support us a lot in those structures so we can remain part IP holders and we can be part of the back end. But I mean, I think what really needs is to say, let's look at the DTI, let's look at the IDC, let's look at the NFF, let's explore what are the need out there, let's get together and let's offer so that we as South African filmmakers can become part of that bigger platform.
Thank you so much for that, Floki. I do think you've really summed up a lot. I will give everybody an opportunity just to give their last word just before we do take any questions from the audience. Kagisho, Milton, Delon, Pepsi.
Can you start this side? Because I want Kagisho to answer a question.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll start with you, Pepsi.
From the group. No, just last point is around, I think it's interesting how we can't all become distributors and figure out the distribution thing. I think potentially, as a sector, we have to get behind 2 or 3 South African distributors and let them go out there and do the work of figuring out global distribution. And the likes of the IDC have got to get behind, because then we're all trying to figure out distribution all over the world. We're trying to figure out how to, nobody's becoming a specialist at it and becoming really good and building these deep international relationships, because we're all trying to do it ourselves. And I think that there's merit there in terms of a discussion behind how do we as an industry get behind 2 or 3 South African distributors and just, send them out into the world and give them the money that they need to go and do, because they essentially work for us. Their jobs are to take our work out there, and we need to figure out how to better empower them to do that. So that's one thing. And then I had a question for Kagisho to say, okay, and I've asked them this a few times, so I'm just putting them on the spot, is they see a lot of projects. They see where a lot of money goes. They see what works and what doesn't work. So I want him to share a success story with us of something that has worked in the not so distant kind of past. What have they funded that's been successful that is something that we can all look at and say, that did really well, that's a model that's worked, that's come out of this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to producers out there, they really have to have an honest conversation with what type of project they're making. Is it something that's only going to live locally? Is it something that's going to live internationally? I think those conversations go a long way, as well as, is it commercially viable? And when we say commercially viable, we talk about a broad scope. And I think often what happens is things get convoluted. Just because you think it's a good story doesn't necessarily mean it's a commercially viable. Fortunately, those things can sometimes be the same, but more than often not, they're not from the way people look at it. And when you're able to box it and you're able to say, okay, well, this is what it is, and you build your finance plan around it, then those realities will set in. And, my view, if you're making South African films, it is difficult because it's a small market. There's only so many people that buy it here. And unfortunately, we don't travel as well as we would like. And as we were saying earlier about distribution, it's difficult to access the market around the world. There's lots of barriers. And so, that's one of the things we're hoping when Netflix and Amazon came in, that, those streamers are interesting, because you would find with Netflix many years ago and with Amazon when it was here for a little bit, that the budgets they were allocating were much bigger, because they weren't just catering for the, 22 million subscribers in South Africa or Africa. They were catering for that market, but then had the spillover of the 200 million other subscribers worldwide that could look into that. So my advice to any young producers and looking at these challenges, first understand what kind of film you're making. Does it have that international or local appeal? And that will help you structure your finance plan from there. But again, understanding that there is, as Pepsi said, that barrier to getting our projects overseas and internationally.
Floki, are you good? Do you want to say anything? I know you spoke earlier. Floki.
Oh,
I was like, I just
no. No, I completely, and I think I said that in the beginning, is, you have to look at the big picture, make sure your story is something. It's like, don't start with this, it's sort of reverse engineer, get the concept, but make sure from the beginning that that concept can travel, because I think, like Delon says, South Africa should be your first platform. So you go through all your different platforms in South Africa, and then you want to get it out there. So because you still want to earn money from that project for the next 6, 7 years, 10 years if you're lucky, but you sort of continue earning from it. And I think that is the big thing, is that when you make a film, you have to make it with the view of, I'm going to make money out of it, and how am I going to make money out of it? And put your business plan together and your structures, and thinking further than just getting it on the closest platform or the first platform that you can.
I think it's important for any producer, creative, filmmaker to recognize that it's a business. Speak about funding, it's investment, then you need to demonstrate a return. It's great to be on a panel with such learned individuals that have kind of been through it, because you can hear from the points that they are making. They've really walked that journey. It's not an easy one to do. Traveling overseas, trying to find a network, make those connections. It takes time, it takes effort. But it's a business on the one side of investing, but it's also a business for the platforms and for the broadcasters that we're selling to. They also have a business model. And I often encourage young filmmakers to first do research. The internet's evolved to a point of where there's nothing that you can't teach yourself or nothing that you can't find online. And we are all consumers. We all consume content. You don't need to look too far to understand what's currently working, what has worked, what's potentially going to start working in the next 2 or 3 years that we see trending now, and try and create or carve out projects that fit those parameters, because those are the ones that are potentially top of mind for when broadcasters and streaming platforms are out there looking for content, because it's their job to create demand for their consumers and keep them in their ecosystem, keep them coming back for more, and they'll need a pipeline of similar titles, whether it's feature films or series, to kind of satisfy that consumer appetite.
I think from my side, can you hear me? Let me start with Pepsi's question. In terms of what we've been successful with since we restarted the financing of the sector, is that the individuals we finance had done their part in a sense of testing the market and raising capital in the market. Because remember, you have two ways of raising capital. You can either put in your own money, or you can do your sweat capital. So the sweat capital is generally what everyone is capable of doing, i.e. filling in those DTI forms, making sure you get an approval, and also negotiating for a pre-sale wherever you are. So there are 2 transactions that we've done so far, where we've done almost 18 films out of that. They were all pre-sold content. They had DTI rebates attached. The other film project that we did was sold in over 10 territories across the globe, and more than $10 million in minimum guarantees. So it was easy to really put it within a risk framework and be able to activate that. I mean, we disbursed just under 400 million across those 2 projects, and already recovered more than 100 million in less than 12 months. So you can see that the structure and the attitude of the producers was completely different. And we're continuously looking for those kind of projects where the sweat capital has been put in. The guy has built relationships. All he needs is money to activate those relationships. And my last thought is that I think as the IDC, if we don't get the private sector to be interested in film, we will have failed in our mandate. So our idea is that, and we constantly have this contrast between the short-term needs of making projects work and building a long-term sustainable business. But our idea is that once social security is no longer a problem, once people are able to create a living out of their talents as filmmakers, and once we bring commercial banks into the system, because now they understand how the cash flows are structured within the industry, I think we will have done a good job, and I think we'll be able to achieve that in the next 5 to 10 years. But it comes down to the sweat capital as an anchor to the whole finance model.
Thank you for that, Kahisho. I must say, very optimistic. 5 to 10 years, I'd probably would have said maybe give it another 15. But hey, maybe you are optimistic about that. And I guess it probably would be something that we can also look into as well. I'm happy to take any questions that we may have from the audience. I think you can specify to say if there is a particular question that you have at any proposed panel member. I do see a hand up. That's 1, 2. Do we have another question? So we can just do 3 at a time. Okay, we've got 2. So I'm happy for us to take those questions.
Hello. I'm a student filmmaker. I have a small production company with a group of other filmmakers. I first want to say, I guess it's less of a question, that it disheartens me, I suppose, to hear the ideas that we need to focus on what stories make money and what things we can do. And I guess I'm young and naive and I haven't been in the industry at all, but it's sad to hear that there isn't the space to tell the stories that we want to tell and that need to be told without thinking, but is this going to be something that people want to produce? And I think what's sad is that me and the people that I make films with, and I know a lot of people my age, the stories that we want to tell are not the stories that are being financed. We want to talk about queer people and black people and what's happening in South Africa with young people, and it doesn't seem that those are the things that are being put out. But my question is, as a young filmmaker, we are looking to go on the festival circuit next year and enter as many things as we can. How do we get funding for something like that? As students, we're not looking to make a return on that kind of money. It's more of a grant, I suppose. What are the platforms for that, and how do we find those things? This is for anyone.
Can I take the first? I can't speak to the second piece, but I did have a comment. You know, what used to happen and doesn't happen enough anymore is where people just take the risk. Where people get together and you've got a camera, you've got that, you piece it together and you make the story that you want to tell. Because sometimes people don't know they want it until you've made it. We don't do that anymore. That used to happen a lot, where you just kind of, you get your shit together and you make something. And you all do it for no money, and this one does that one does that, and you make it, and you put it out there. And because of the technology, you can make pretty good quality content without waiting for somebody else to buy it. And then you put it out there, and there are those stories where somebody's made something and it's like, we didn't even know we wanted it, and it works. So if you're telling stories of the future that these old people on this panel don't know that they want, then tell them and make them and take the risk. And earlier I wasn't putting Kagiso on the spot. I wanted him to make the point that he was making about you've got to do the work. Either you're making it, you're taking the risk, you've got to do the work first before anybody else is going to give you money or support you. I can't answer the second bit about festivals.
I just want to also just add to what my colleague was saying here is, and you used the word earlier, sweat capital. I like that. That's a good word. Because when you're younger, and when we were younger filmmakers, there was a lot of sweat capital. Working on weekends, asking people for favors, doing all of that. And we made the films that you are now making here. And if I think back, that a lot of that was made with great soft money, grants from the NFEF, when the GFC works. You know, the rebate, there are certain ways of making films with complete soft money. So those, you should learn how those instruments work. And they're great instruments, you know. Getting an NFEF grant, I think it's maybe 260,000 Rand for a short film. I don't know what it is exactly. Go get it. You know, that's money for free. You don't have to pay it back on short films. I think on feature films you do. But those are the things, and you're going to have to put a lot of that sweat capital. You're going to have to put that show reel together so people know what you're about. So when we're telling you about financing, it's about what the market and how the market's unfortunately structured. You know, that's just the unfortunate part of it. But if you go make some great short, like Alive in Joburg. Alive in Joburg is what Neil Blomkamp did with Sholto Copley, 20 years ago. That was the precursor to District 9. That was the story we all wanted to see, but didn't know that we wanted to see, as Pepsi said, you know. So you've got to go out there and use all that energy and make those stories and, you know, give us those films we don't know we want to see.
Second question.
We do have a second question.
Is name talent to a pre-sale strategy?
Please repeat your question.
How important is securing name talent for a film pre-sale strategy?
Can I give that over to you, Milton? How important is it to have a strategy for your pre-sales?
No, name talent.
Name talent.
Name talent.
Name talent. Oh.
Yeah, I think it's one of the considerations. It's not the only consideration. You know, I think I've seen a lot of great films with a lot of great actors, and you know, they don't end up being the box office hits or the output agreements don't trigger just because it had, you know, Will Smith or somebody in it. But it is one of the main considerations, particularly when you're playing in the international markets. It helps with the evaluation and identifying where that target audience is going to be sitting. Right? Because in the international sales market, you really are working with other distributors in their markets. And their assessment is going to be a very commercial one, is to say, well, if this name talent is in, I'm willing to pay X, and if it's not, I may not even be willing to look at the project. But it's not always the only consideration. I mean, there's a whole creative team that's behind that as well. You know, if you have got a good director, or if you've got a really sterling writer that's attached to it, in certain markets that may hold even more weight than just the name talent, because talent is probably one of your most expensive packaging elements when it comes to projects. So I think if you are at that level and your project is at that level, I think all of us aspire to kind of have that, and some of the most successful filmmakers make a point of doing that. Particularly when doing projects that are from South Africa, but that we absolutely want to travel beyond these borders. We've seen that balancing act happen where we use a lead international cast, and not always an A-lister, but really good enough, recognized across other continents, and pair them up with great local talent.
I think the question around funding
Oh,
of the market circuits. I think the NFVF does have a program like that, where you can apply to go to markets with your projects. I met quite a bunch of young producers in Berlin. They were sponsored by the NFVF, and they kind of inspired us to even launch a film fund for young people. So those systems are there. You can take advantage of that.
Can I just... it wasn't really your question, but I'd feel remiss if I didn't say this before I left, because I think a lot of filmmakers sit in your space where it's the film that you want to make, or it's a series that you want to make, but it's not necessarily the stuff that people are looking for right now. And it's a timing thing. You know, it could be a timing thing. I'd always encourage young filmmakers to not stop developing that, because, you know, like you said, it's not the film that it's not the one that we thought we needed, but we definitely want it now. But you also have to appreciate that you've got to work on something else that is going to appeal to the markets, to the broadcasters, to consumers, whilst you're doing that.
I think we have just under a minute. I'm not sure if we do have any last questions from the audience. No questions? Okay, so I'll take the last two. So I'll begin with the gentleman on my left-hand side.
Hi, just to speak to her question about the granting system. I guess in terms of the NFVF's budget, it's been quite stifled over the last couple of years. Is there any intention at the IPO side to lobby the ministry to increase the budget?
Well, I mean, the minister's here today.
Fantastic.
So, you know,
let's get him to work.
From what I've heard, he agrees there needs to be some more money there. So,
Yeah, the IPO is
no,
lobbying.
just from an IPO point of view, we're always lobbying, we're always pushing, we always need more money. There's never enough money. So we are pushing those things. We're very hopeful that with the new minister in place, there'll be some certain amount of change. So yeah. But at the end of the day, those grant systems are there. You should definitely tap into them. They are what a lot of us started our careers on.
I think it's just an IPO, and Ayanda can speak to this. As IPO, we're also lobbying quite hard that more money is spent on the filmmakers in all these grant systems and less on the admin piece. So these guys, Ayanda and team, work very hard, and we're always lobbying and fighting. But it is a question that the minister should get asked as well. So you guys have an opportunity when the minister's speaking to ask those questions.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's not another question, but I just wanted to follow up and say we are making the stories. They're made. We just need to get them out there. So, but I really appreciate all your feedback. I just wish there was like resources available to young filmmakers, because I think a lot of the stuff that you guys are talking about, it's kind of industry know-how, and it's things that you come to know because you've been in this system, but actually starting that process and getting there, because you say like these acronyms and things, and I don't know, just as a young filmmaker, I wish there was like a document, here's who you can ask for money.
You know what I want to say to that is, when we started making films 20 years ago, we were shooting on celluloid, which was 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter. That was difficult because if you didn't have money to buy a can of film, you couldn't make a movie. You guys have such great access to digital equipment, AI, you know what I'm trying to say? So you think that there are boundaries. Obviously, my phone will ring while I'm giving this, but you think that there are boundaries, and a lot of those boundaries and parameters have been broken. You've got a camera, you've got edit suites, you can go do that and you can get your vision out there. It's a lot easier today to get those first films off the ground than they were 20 years ago, going and begging a lab to develop your 5-6 rolls of film, you know? So you've got the equipment, you just got to continue that fight.
Thank you for that, Delon. And I think I might just also add on to that to say that I think Floki mentioned it earlier, to say that it's up to you to take the stand of wanting to get the network, wanting to get the information. A simple thing that you started off by saying is simply being here and reaching out to a particular individual that you do want to get into. I do think that the panel touched on more. We touched on governmental institutes such as the NFVF. We touched on funding models. What does it look like in the next 10 years? Success stories. What does sustainability also look like? I'd just like to say thank you so much to my panelists for a great discussion, conversation, and also just exploring what the solutions do look like in the film sort of landscape. Thank you to everyone who was able to join us today, and thank you to the audience who posed some questions, and I do hope that we did answer those to the best of our ability. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.